Hi, you're watching Shape Up with Sue Daley. Today we're going to be working with equilateral triangles. They are shaped like this, equilateral. All sides are equal. If you sew 6 of them together, they come from a hexagon. Seems like everything comes from a hexagon these days. Wherever I go, there's hexagons. So we're going to take our fabric and our acrylic template with your seam allowance on it, pop it on top of your rotating mat and cut and cut. And you can top and tail these shapes on your fabric so you don't waste anything. So we have our equilateral triangles. We're going to glue them like we've done in the past. Take your paper, pop it on top of your fabric, and your glue pen just inside the edge of the fabric. And I don't think I've ever explained to you why we do that. Why I say don't glue right to the edge of your paper. And the reason for that is because if you glue right to the very edge of your paper, when you go to sew your pieces together, it's very difficult to get the needle through the glue. So if you're having trouble getting your needle through the edge, along the edge when you're stitching them together, maybe you need to look at your gluing. Maybe you're gluing too close to the edge. So remember, just in from the edge a little bit. So we would make 6 of these and we would put them together just like we did with the 6-pointed star last week, and we would form a hexagon with it. So you would make them all so that their tails are all laying in the same direction. So I've cut these out and I've alternated them with a different colour, but you can see that all the tails are laying. The ones that are going into the middle are all laying in the same direction. Remember, we started on the same side and worked in the same direction, and that's how you will get your tails laying all in the same direction. And then we'll put them together just like the 6-pointed star, where you lay one under the other, and you're going to sew it from here to here. Remember, pulling the tails back within your fingers, and then you can add your next one. And again, just like the 6-pointed star, you'll turn it around. You'll do your 2 stitches at the beginning and come to the end. So that way you're going to have 2 sections. Okay, now be careful when you're sewing it. If you're doing alternating colours, you need to be careful that when you're sewing it, that you then get your colours in the right place. Okay. Yeah. So now we have 2 halves, and just like we did with the 6-pointed star, you can sew 2 halves together. Remember, don't sew them around into a circle. Make 1 half, then the other half, and then put them together and sew them together as one. Here I've got another one I've done earlier. So we've done 2 halves and sewn them together. This piece I have fussy cut. Here we have another one. Again, this one's been fussy cut, and it's difficult to see what shapes I've actually used in there, but if you look at the back, you'll see that I've used the equilateral triangles. Here we have another one which I've done a fussy cut as well. However, I didn't have enough fabric to fussy cut 6 the same, so I've cut 3 the same and then 3 other ones the same and put them together. And here again we have some more, just fussy cutting again, very simply with the stripe going straight up and down on the fabric. Okay, so fussy cutting. I thought I'd share with you how I do fussy cutting. Fussy cutting is one of those things that it looks great. It looks really good, and you can fussy cut lots of different things, but be really careful not to overdo it. I think if you overdo fussy cutting, it can look a bit tacky. So I think less is more, and if you do it and use it as a feature on your quilt, it looks beautiful. So for fussy cutting, I would take a fabric that perhaps would look something like this. It's quite busy, but I look at my pattern repeat and I can see that my pattern repeats itself. If you look this way, it's repeating itself going across the fabric quite closely so that you're not losing or wasting too much fabric when you use it. Okay. Another one you can fussy cut is this one. This is a directional fabric, and these often look great fussy cut. So you can put your fabric anywhere on here, and provided you cut on the same pattern repeat, then you're going to make a completely different pattern with when you put your pieces together. So fussy cutting, I believe, can make really ugly fabric look good. And people say, oh, I don't have ugly fabric. But, you know, sometimes ugly fabric isn't about being ugly. It's about fabric that you don't quite know what to do with. And sometimes it's just about the colour, or sometimes it's about the pattern. And if you fussy cut it, you can change the whole pattern on that fabric to make something quite beautiful. It may be just the perfect colour. So sometimes, like, you might have a fabric with monkeys on it. And if you fussy cut those monkeys, you can get something that doesn't look like a monkey when you're finished. So have a look at your fabric and see what you have that maybe you can fussy cut and turn into something really, really good. I've taken a piece of fabric from my last range of fabric called Twig and Grace, and I designed it specifically for fussy cutting. So you can see I've already chopped into this piece of fabric. Before you start, you need to make sure that you have enough pattern repeat. So if I'm working with a 6-pointed star, I need to make sure I have 6 of the same pattern repeat right across my fabric. Okay, so you can see where I've cut all those pieces out. And then I can go back and I can cut from a different pattern repeat, and a different pattern repeat, and a different pattern repeat. So you're not wasting too much fabric. You'll end up with a piece of fabric that looks like Swiss cheese, but that doesn't matter. At least you're not wasting it. I mean, who wastes fabric? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay this down here. I'm going to show you how I would fussy cut. Now there's a couple of little tricks that I use, so watch carefully. I have a thing called a fussy cut mirror. Okay, and all it is 2 mirrors that are hinged together at the back. Now if you place that on your fabric and you place the template in front of the fussy cut mirror, the template that you wish to use, and you close the mirror around that template, you can look into the mirror and it will show you exactly what your fabric's going to look like, or exactly what your block's going to look like. Some people are really worried about fussy cutting, but if it's on the same pattern repeat, you will get something. You will get something. It may not be exactly what you're looking for, but you will get something. With the fussy cut mirror, you can have a look at it and you can see what you're going to get every time. So you can place your template in there and you can move it around your fabric, just like that. Okay? So what I do is I take my mirror, I pop it onto my fabric, and I'm going to look for where there's a really good spot that I like, and I'm going to take my template back out. I'm going to get a little piece of double-sided tape. You know that tape that, it's a very thin tape, and you can get it, a lot of scrapbookers use it. So you can stick it to the reverse of your template, and you can peel that white piece off from the back, and I just then pop my template back in to where I want it to go, and I press down on the fabric, and I remove my mirror. I can then cut my shape out and when I lift my template up, I have my fabric already stuck to my template. Therefore, when you go and you want to cut that same pattern repeat, I can take this with it stuck onto my template and I can line it up to where exactly where I need to cut it again. So I can see through my template and I can line it up with this piece of fabric on top of this piece of fabric, and I can see exactly where I've cut it. So I can cut another one. So now I have 2 identical pieces of fabric. So I would go and I would cut 6 in total. And as I said before, you never quite know what you're going to get, but working with the Fussy Cut mirror, you can see what you're going to get. And remember that your design is going to sit inside the dotted line on our green template, because the outside edge is going to be folded under. So you need to make sure that what you're working with is sitting inside the dotted line. Okay, so when we go to sew those together, you can sew them around 2 halves, 1 half, 2 halves, and you put it together and you get a great pattern. The good thing about 6-pointed stars is that if you don't like the one that you started with, you can turn it in the other way and you get 2 choices. So this one, we can get a choice with that, or you can turn it around and you'll get a choice like that. I fussy cut. Now, I didn't invent that idea. I have a friend in Melbourne who shared that with me. She does a lot of patchwork, and her name escapes me right now. Shirley is her name, Shirley from Melbourne, and she shared that with me some time ago, and it was one of the best things I ever learned. So I'm sharing it with you. I think it's a great idea. A little bit of double-sided tape goes a long way. But just remember, when you're choosing your fabric, make sure you have the right number of pattern repeats on there. Don't start cutting because you may only have 5 and you need 6. Okay? I'm going to talk to you about the quilt that I have hanging behind me, and talk you through the fussy cutting I did on that quilt, and things that I do to give quilts a little bit more movement. And one of the things that I always say to people is, don't be afraid of using stripes. Striped fabrics, like things like this, I mean, it's not really interesting, it's not, you know, beautiful with lots of patterns all over. It is a stripe, and you can use it to make more movement in your quilt, and I'm going to explain that with the quilt behind and show you what I've done with that, because it will create different effects for you. Okay, so I wanted to show you one of my quilts that I've done some fussy cutting with. Now, when I decided to do this quilt, I went to the local shop and I bought a piece of fabric that I knew I could fussy cut. The piece that's around the outside edge here, which is a very busy piece of fabric. However, it made lots of great designs. So as you can see, in the bottom here, I have fussy cut the same piece of fabric from the border into this 8-pointed star into the middle. So there was 8 pieces all cut on the same pattern repeat. And if I take it over here to this corner, you will see the same piece of fabric cut on a different pattern repeat, the same 8-pointed star, but on a different pattern repeat. Into the middle of the quilt, the same piece of fabric, I've cut kite shapes, so it all looks like one hexagon, but there's 6 kite shapes in there, and the same kite shape is up here, and they're all fussy cut, so each one of those looks exactly the same. A different piece of fabric I've cut on the same pattern repeat here. The baskets I also cut on the same pattern repeat, so each one of these baskets is the same piece of fabric. If you go out to the star on this corner, you'll see that I've used the same fabric here, and I've put that same 8-pointed star, but I've inset it into in and out of the squares there, so you can see that's also fussy cut. Now, if you look at the stripe fabric in this particular star here, it's a stripe fabric, and I've got all the stripes coming out through the middle of the 8-pointed star, so it gives a different effect. And then down here, the same piece of fabric, this was the same piece of fabric but just cut on a different repeat, and if you look carefully at that, it gives it a round effect. So it gives that whole block, where it is actually an octagon, it actually shows it from a distance, it looks like it's round. And I've just inset the squares in here. Now down on this one, in the bottom corner here, again, I've done the same thing. They're all the 4 corner blocks are all exactly the same. We've got our 8-pointed stars, and we've got our squares, and we've got the 8-pointed stars. And again, I just cut this check type fabric on the same pattern repeat, and it gives a great design. In fact, when I first bought that fabric, it was fabric that I didn't really like, but it was the right colour that I needed. But once I turn it up, I really like the whole finished look of the block. The striped fabric again, the one that's in that top corner and the one down in the bottom, is here again. I've used it in the kite shape, and again you can see it's a whole different look. So you can see that with a busy piece of fabric you can make something look quite different. And as I said before, you can have quite difficult fabric to use, or something that, you know, I call ugly fabric. It's not necessarily ugly, but I call it ugly. And you can chop it up and you can make great designs with it. And but remember, less is more. Don't overdo it. I think that if you make a feature with it, it makes things look really beautiful. And I see these days that a lot of people are fussy cutting their hexagons as well, and that's making really beautiful little flowers like for your grandma's flower garden. So I hope you have fun with that. I've enjoyed bringing it to you today, and if you want to send me some photos of any of your work that you've done or some fussy cutting, I'd love to see them, and I'd love to be able to showcase them on my blog so everybody else can see them as well. But remember, if you have any questions for me, please send them in and I'd love to answer them for you. And if you'd like to subscribe to the videos, see the form below, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye! Questions I get asked are, do you take the paper out? Do you leave the paper in? How do you take the paper out? Or you've glued it. I don't know that I can get the paper out. Well, it's real simple. All you need to do is to go to the back of your work,